Hello, Telegraph Rugby Podcast listeners. I'm Danny Kerr and I've teamed up with Erwin Mitchell, the official legal partner of England Rugby, to share some special moments that matter from the game we care so much about. Search for Moments That Matter with Erwin Mitchell and the Telegraph.
Hello everybody, welcome back to the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. What a weekend in Paris. We had a sort of a warm-up dish on Friday night with Argentina, not quite meeting New Zealand standard and suffering a heavy loss. And then what an astonishing game on Saturday night in the rain in Paris. It was really quite something to behold. I'm Ben Coles and I'm joined as ever by Charlie Morgan. Hi Charlie.
Colesy.
And also by Charles Richardson. Hi Charles.
Good morning everybody.
For the first time in the tournament, all three of us were in the same city and we got to watch the same games. I mean, I think the less said about New Zealand and Argentina, the better, but we'll obviously have to recap it. But in terms of Saturday night, Charlie, if I come to you first, how have you sort of reflected on England's performance in that game?
I think similarly to how we were all feeling at the time, that it felt like such an assured, intelligent, tough, super tough performance for 65 minutes, didn't it? And I think at the time as well, in the moment, you were thinking 15-6, that's a really, really good lead, but you want to be sort of more than 10 points ahead, because a try and a penalty, you're sort of within range and you're almost at the mercy of how much South Africa are going to seize control of the game with the forwards that they've got on their bench. And unfortunately for England, it just fell away, didn't it? But it was stirring. It was really, I think the reaction from a lot of people has been that it's a performance to sort of reassure and restore pride. And I think that's totally fair. I think a semi-final exit, on the face of it, given England's draw, isn't particularly special. It's almost par, but I think that performance ratchets up actually how the whole tournament campaign will be viewed.
Charles, I know you settled down with a nice glass of whiskey last night to watch the game back. What did you make of it?
Similar emotions and similar sort of reflections as Saturday, really. It was a colossal effort. Better team lost. You really felt for Steve Borthwick and his coaching team, who had concocted and conjured this tactical master plan that came within a point or 2 points of sealing the win and delivering the goods. I agree with Charlie. I think that performance, regardless of the result, I know the result would be seen as par when written down on paper. I think that performance has done a lot to sort of convince the English rugby public that Steve Borthwick has the capabilities to get this team back to where it should be at the top of the world tree, and that we do have the players to compete at that level. And maybe he just needs a little bit more time. And clearly, what he inherited was not in the best state. But in such a short period of time, he's brought it such a long way. And I think him, his coaching staff, and the players deserve enormous credit.
Yeah, I think that's all very fair. I think we often have forgotten over the past year where kind of England were in January when the coaching staff came in and the job that they've had to do, really. Tons of coverage on the website, as you'd expect from that game. Keep an eye out for Charlie having a look at some of the players who should come into the England squad, because, squad selection never sleeps. We're always wondering about who's next and what's going to happen with the side. And also the latest in this incident between Tom Curry and Bongi Mbonambi, which seems to be changing almost by every couple of hours. So there's plenty for you to look out for on the website. But for now, let's dig in more into the game and find out how South Africa squeaked into another World Cup final. It was really tough for England, wasn't it? Having just started so well. Charlie, if I come to you first, there was loads to like about that start. What was it in particular which you were really impressed by?
Well, that's a good question, because it was multifaceted as well. And as we've always said, where Steve Borthwick is at his best, or where Steve Borthwick teams are at his best more accurately, is when those different facets of a performance marry up. And I think England finally got there with that, albeit they would have liked to have been, despite the conditions, they might feel that they could have been a little bit more clinical moving the ball and just finishing off a couple of try scoring chances. Maybe better field position would be sort of more fairer to say. Most impressive for me was just how they withstood South Africa's maul. They almost nullified totally South Africa's maul. That was a fantastic battle. And then a couple of times South Africa ran a really clever line-out move where they went over 15 metres and went back inside to Curtly Arenza, and Alex Mitchell was alert enough to make a fantastic tap tackle. You saw physicality from Elliot Daly with on the back of, so Laws swoops for a turnover, doesn't he, on the back of that Alex Mitchell tap tackle. Alex Mitchell was fantastic with his control, his kicking. He then, at that stage of the game, lifts a box kick for Elliot Daly to absolutely smoke Dwayne Vermeulen. Other we could go on about other aspects of its selection. I think went really well. We'll talk maybe about the timing of the replacements and the ordering of that team, but I don't think much more could have been done as far as preparing the side. There's a few things to go at there, but I think the overarching feeling was just how assured they were and how much conviction there was in that plan. And you don't get to 15-6 up against the world champions without that. It wasn't that it was a lucky performance. It was that so much of their preparation had come off.
All the defining moments of that first half. I mean, you've touched on one there, Daly smoking Vermeulen, but they were all, I think, except for the break by Curtly Arenza, they were all on the English side. You think of George Martin, you think of the Laws turnovers, and then just into the second half, the Farrell drop goal, all the big defining moments of the match all seemed, and the maul disruption in the first half as well, that was so key. It all seemed to be, the stars seemed to be aligning for England, but that bench that we'll chat about soon, it just killed them, didn't it?
I think it was, for me, if I had to pick one, it was probably just how accurate England's kicking game was off both 9 and 10, but more to that, how the chasers actually were so effective at getting the ball back. We were bemoaning in the warm-ups, weren't we, how England were kind of just sending up kicks and never really seemed to be in a position to actually slap the ball back or actually compete in the air, but they did that so well. I mean, it was conditions they were praying for, I think is a fair thing to say. Like when they spoke about how the conditions basically dictated their game plan, and it just so happens that is their preferred kind of game plan and the way that they want to attack teams, and it all fell into their lap in that regard. And but they actually executed that kicking game so well that I was just very impressed by that. I wonder if you had to rank where England's performance kind of sits. They had some good wins in Australia. Is it their best win, though, since that semi-final in 2019, would you say, Charles?
Well, they lost.
Best performance, I should say. Not their best win. Their best moral win.
Yes, I think it's up there with South Africa, the South Africa win in the autumn of 2021. Australian, I don't think quite the same beast as South Africa, although that Test Series win was exceptional. I'd say yes, simply because for 65 minutes they were virtually flawless. And I don't think an England team has put that sort of an immaculate stretch together in the past 4 years in such a sort of consistent short burst. Well, we've seen it in bursts, but to have such a long stretch, to have an hour stretch, was it wasn't enough in the end, of course, and I'm sure Steve Borthwick and his coaches will be leading a post-mortem of that final 20 minutes and what happened. But the first hour was immensely encouraging.
Speaking of Steve Borthwick, we've got a bit of audio from him now, just from post-match, just talking about the preparation of having to cram everything into a few months as opposed to having a 4-year cycle. So here's that audio now.
As for the game plan tonight, as for how we come as a team, we're playing against a team there that's had a coaching team that's been in place since the middle of 2018. They had 18 months to the World Cup and did an incredible achieving to win the 2019 World Cup, and there's had 4 years since then of continuous development, bringing players through, and the coaching team has been really, really consistent. For us, we've had 4 months as a coaching team with the players, and I've asked the players to approach training in a different way. I've asked them to approach the way we think about the game in a different way, and to ask them to do that and the players to be willing to change, I think that's all credit to them. And because they have been willing to change, they have been willing to try some different things. And tonight was another example of that. And I'm really grateful to them for the attitude they bring every day.
Just off the back of that, I think we have to talk about the scrum and just how well that went for South Africa and how disastrously it went for England in the second half. Oxenchair came on against France and was absolutely brutal with the way that he took Dorian Aldegheri apart, wasn't he? And he repeated the trick for the second time in a week against first Dan Cole, who had scrummaged well up to that point, but then also Carl Sinclair when Carl Sinclair came on. It's kind of, I like that Oxenchair has a personal motto that salads don't win scrums, and he certainly seemed to absolutely relish the opportunity right there. Charlie, that's got to be a bit of a concern long term, do we think, given the prop resources available to England and who's kind of coming through?
Yeah, cold hard facts are that's two World Cup campaigns that have finished with with the scrum being a area that's harmed them and has leaked penalties at vital points. I actually I can't even remember now whether it was before the tournament or during the tournament, but at one point in the last couple of months, I went down to I had a call with a couple of the England age group coaches about their about this Type 5 camp that they're running. They're bringing in the most promising players in sort of the most promising props, hookers, locks to really solidify that area of the game. And it was really interesting to hear them talk about how it was. I asked specifically, is this a reaction to what the talent that's coming through to senior level and how that's getting ready through Premiership games, and sort of being, at what point is it available to national coaches? And they were saying no, it wasn't. It's more a reaction to how age group coaching has gone, and how there was a dictatorial sort of side of coaching, and that evolved into sort of a lot of small-sided games, and then they were just wondering whether those small-sided games were really getting the most out of developing these set piece skills in the best way possible. So the RFU are on it. If you think of sort of who's around in the piece you mentioned earlier, Colsey, I've mentioned Joe Hayes, 24 years old, already 125 first team games for Leicester Tigers, which is absolutely mad. There's on the loosehead side, Finn Baxter at Harlequins is just one guy. Obviously, in those two cases, Hayes and Baxter, they're being mentored by Dan Cole and Joe Marler at club level for the foreseeable future. So that's a huge boost, and England have got to make the most of those networks. Maybe something that is being overlooked in all of this, and which, shout out to Charles, he mentioned bang on at the time, was that England got pushed off. They didn't concede a penalty, but they got pushed off a scrum as Nche arrived in the 52nd minute, 53rd minute, something like that. Didn't concede the penalty though. And at that point, George Martin went off, and he'd been scrummaging behind Dan Cole. And obviously, big old boy, was seriously impressive, and kind of glad that we gave him the big raps in the preview pod. He sort of delivered on that, didn't he? But that was another factor. So it's the whole Type 5, and that just goes to show, doesn't it? You've just got to be stable in that area the whole time. England weren't stable at the beginning of the 2019 World Cup final, and they paid for it. They weren't stable at the end of the 2023 World Cup semi-final, and they paid for it again.
What I can't quite comprehend is Ellis Genge and Carl Sinclair are good scrummagers. I think I've seen a lot this week about throwing them under the bus and saying they're not technically good and technically sound scrummagers. They are. So I'm not sure if it just was maybe Genge has not come off the bench very often in this tournament, and that's a slightly different sort of frame of mind you've got to be in to scrummage, and maybe that went against him a little bit. I'm not sure, because his scrummaging has improved so much. Like whenever England have played Ireland over the past couple of years, he's really had Furlong on the ropes. And you think of that game in the 2022 Six Nations where Charlie Ewels was sent off. England sort of had a 7+1 pack almost, and he really had Furlong on the ropes. So he's not a bad scrummager, but he did get it wrong last week, and he was under a lot of pressure from Vincent Koch, who's not as good a scrummager as Franz Malherbe. So I don't know. I mean, I still think that final penalty that decided the game was incredibly harsh, especially as a match deciding decision. But there were a couple of others that were absolute stonewall bankers. So England can't really have too many complaints about the final penalty when that was the way that the wind was blowing anyway. I think in ideal circumstances, Ben O'Keefe would have reset, and then it probably would have ended up with a South Africa penalty anyway. So there's not really many complaints that England can have. But yeah, I just found that Sinclair got incredibly long-legged. I don't know if that was due to how short Oxenchae is and the angle that he was going in on. But it seemed completely different to the scrummaging picture that Joe Marler and Dan Cole were painting earlier in the game.
You mentioned the way the wind was blowing there, Charles. Isn't that the key of it? That it was sort of a narrative that was just going towards a quite inevitable conclusion. They'd forced the penalty even before they repeated the trick of they had two marks, didn't they? And the first one they really weighed up. South Africa really weighed up, calling for the scrum again. And the second one they did, and England sort of locked it out. But you just felt that there was another kind of dominant shove in them, and that's the whole and the reverse was happening at the beginning of the game because Cole and Marler were painting these good pictures and setting the narrative that no, we're always legal, we're strong under this. And you wonder whether that 52nd minute scrum actually with Cole still on the field was the one that changed things. And although, as we said, England didn't actually infringe at that set the tone of, right, okay, the back end of this game is only going one way. And that's, as we keep saying, referees are human. That's sort of the way these momentum swings work.
I think the one that was incredibly unfair was that one on the line where Farrell had put the kick through, Curtly Arenza had spilled, and at that point that felt like another key moment in the game. In fact, at that point, I thought that England were going to push on from there and win. Maybe not score a try, but I thought Farrell might drop another 3 points. And then that one did seem unfair because Sinclair did stay very, very straight. He went backwards, and that's not a penalty. Going backwards at a scrum is not a penalisable offence. And he stayed very straight and then just went again quite straight. And I thought that was incredibly harsh, and that felt again like a turning point in the game. And also just linked to this, what a cruel twist of fate that the match-winning 3 points came from a shanked Freddie Stewart, Gary Owen and spill that led to the scrum with the penalty when he was exquisite all game, magnificent all game. His first error came in the 77th, 78th minute, and it cost is probably a little bit too strong, but it certainly led to the match-winning penalty, which was just incredibly cruel.
Yeah, you're right. It was brilliant. The one when I went back through the scrums, sort of in the early hours on Sunday morning, there's one that Nche wins penalty where England don't even protest. They just literally trot away, and I think that probably said more than anything just how under the cosh they were in certain areas. They were quite happy to just get to the next bit of phase play because they knew they were under the pump. In terms of the latest with Tom Curry and Bongi Mbonambi, so to recap for anyone who's playing catch up, although you'll have done well to have missed it the last couple of days. Tom Curry went over to the referee Ben O'Keefe in the first half and said that he'd been called something by Bongi Mbonambi and asked what he was meant to do. The kind of ref link audio of that came out Sunday morning. South Africa were asked about it in their Sunday morning press conference, and Dion Davies, the assistant coach, said he wasn't aware of it. The story then came out with the audio from the ref link. World Rugby are now investigating. South Africa have released a statement as well, saying that they were chatting to Bongi Mbonambi about it. And the latest kind of twist is sort of whether the moment and what Mbonambi said has been lost in translation a bit between what Tom Curry thought he heard and the Afrikaans between Bongi and Mbonambi might have said. Charles, this is a story which isn't quite yet over, and it does seem feasible that Bongi Mbonambi might have been talking in Afrikaans, but there's obviously huge sort of potential repercussions if he was to get suspended, given he's the only hooker in the squad, isn't he?
Yeah, and they would not be able to call up a replacement because you can't call up a replacement for a player that's been banned. So it would be Dion Fourie starting at 2 with Marco van Staden on the bench, you'd expect. The linguistic basis of the defence, I've no doubt about. But we know the subtext here is we know there is history between these two players from that game in 2022 at Twickenham. We know that Bongi Mbonambi didn't shake Tom Curry's hand after the game. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think that Bongi Mbonambi would have been aware of Tom Curry's complaint to Ben O'Keefe at the time because it happened away from the South Africa players. So he might not have been aware of that complaint at the time. And then to be honest, it's a shame that we're having to talk about this, and it's a shame that the match has been sort of almost tainted by this. What was a fantastic game and a fantastic England performance. I don't think we will ever truly discover the truth. I think there's probably one, maybe two people who know exactly what went on, and so therefore I think it might be all a bit of an exercise in futility, really. I know World Rugby are investigating, but I can't imagine them finding anything particularly conclusive.
Is the greatest scandal from that game not actually that you changed your prediction right before kickoff, saying that South Africa were going to win, having said
oh my goodness,
that England were going to win? I mean, let's talk about that for a second, shall we?
Well, yeah. So on the podcast special last week, I sort of had felt a lot more confident about an England victory, and then just before kickoff, I said South Africa narrowly. In my defence, all I would say is Steve Borthwick's tactical masterclass also completely mirrored Charles Richardson's tactical masterclass, because last Monday I wrote a piece on the Telegraph website that was ripped to shreds by our commenters and subscribers on how England could get into South Africa, and it basically revolved around starting Joe Marler, starting Freddie Stewart, and kicking the leather off everything and letting Elliot Daly and Johnny May, who are taller than Kurt Lorenz and Cheslin Colby, win everything back and exploit South Africa aerially. And lo and behold, that is exactly what happened. But of course, we didn't win. So actually, I didn't quite have enough.
Yeah, and my preview offering was how Danny Kerr should start over Alex Mitchell, and that was absolutely the opposite. That was horrific. Happy to hold up my hands, but in my defence, that was, I would say, by a long way, Alex Mitchell's most assured performance. Certainly from a kicking point of view, he was absolutely fantastic. So much precision, so much calm at the base of those rucks, and actually shout out of a moment that I'd totally forgotten. At half time, was there about 4 seconds left before the end of the half, and he took the ball away and sort of scurried, sort of sidewinding towards his own dead ball line and kicked it out on the nose of 40 minutes. I've seen Roman Antamak do that and thought that's one of the coolest things I've seen. And then for Alex Mitchell to replicate it was icy, very cool.
Reinach was breathing down his neck, wasn't he? The only other thing I would say is that I said that it should be Ford Farrell, and I think in hindsight, with how little action there was in the midfield and how often England kicked, I do think that might have been a mistake to not go Ford Farrell. Maybe with Manu at 13. I mean, South Africa, Jesse Creel didn't touch the ball once, so the argument of defence is not quite as sound as usual. I do think maybe if there was going to be that much kicking from both sides, then I think maybe Ford Farrell could have been the way to go. But it shoulda, woulda, coulda, and it's difficult to be critical because of just what the sort of gargantuan size of the effort.
Are you saying that you didn't take the under on overall centre touches at 4.5? Because I certainly did. I mean, look at the weather.
What about the? I mean, it's a terrible weekend for the bookies because they had South Africa by 13. What were they all thinking at 15-6?
Yeah, no, that's very true. Listen, South Africa are through to the final. They're going to face New Zealand. And New Zealand got there actually playing some very, very nice rugby, just in a bit of a dull game. So let's talk about that next.
Hi, Danny Kerr here. I've teamed up with Owen Mitchell, the official legal partner of England Rugby and the Telegraph, to talk to you about the moments that matter. During a special time for rugby, we're speaking to current and former England players to find out about those moments that mean everything to them. If you want to protect the things that mean everything to you, now and in the future, then Erwin Mitchell's legal and financial experts can help you plan for the moments that matter. To find out more, search for Moments That Matter with Erwin Mitchell and The Telegraph.
Right, Friday night in Paris. From the moment we got to the stadium, I think it's fair to say it all felt a little bit different to the Ireland-New Zealand, France-Africa quarterfinals from the weekend before, which was sort of what we feared. And then Argentina started actually quite lively, didn't they? And then Charles, it all kind of went wrong, and it turned into the Will Jordan New Zealand are going to run your socks off show, and that was fun, wasn't it? But it just wasn't the best game.
It unravelled, didn't it? I mean, I think there's a good comparison to be made here. I think people who say that, who try and sort of play down England's performance a bit and say that, South Africa would have been emotionally and physically shattered after that victory against France. So the fact that England didn't even win against a team that were that much on the ropes, should go down as a black mark, really, and a bit of a failure. But then, I would put it to them that the night before, New Zealand were in exactly the same position. Okay, they'd had 1 day extra to recover, but they were in exactly the same position against. They'd beaten Ireland in a similarly titanic match a week before, and they were coming up against Argentina, who really had nothing to lose. And the embarrassment for New Zealand in losing to Argentina in comparison with South Africa to England would have been far greater, so there was far more pressure. Argentina gave it a good go for 10 minutes, and then that was that. Also, Colsey, in the intro, you referred to this as a warm-up dish. Is that a sort of starter or an amuse-bouche? What sort of warm-up dish were we talking about on Saturday night? On Friday night? Sorry.
Let's go amuse-bouche. I'm glad you also mixed up the days there, because I couldn't get my head around that the England-South Africa game was on a Saturday, not Sunday. An amuse-bouche. An amuse-bouche. I'm trying to think what I was really expecting that game to be, but I think we always thought New Zealand were going to win by about 15, 20 points. So actually, we just got a little bit more than we hoped for. Charlie, in terms of the All Blacks, Ian Foster's clearly the best coach in the world. Always said it. Definitely said it last summer. Look at them now in the final against South Africa. They were very impressive, weren't they? I mean, they're great fun to watch when everything clicks in the back line.
Yeah, and the players that Ian Foster sort of brought in to reinvigorate them after that Ireland series loss. Shannon Frizzell, Geordie Barrett, Ethan de Groot, Tyrell Lomax, all really, really good, weren't they? And yeah, it was odd. We were like three Saracens, weren't we? Turning up to the game, trying to kind of build our own energy, because it was flat. You're right, and yeah, as you mentioned, Charles, Argentina started well with that kind of long period of possession, and then Santiago Carreras kicked quite an odd grubber that didn't go anywhere inside the 22, and then from there, it looked like New Zealand flicked a switch as far as going, right, we can. The conditions are not great, but good enough for us to spread the ball and hurt Argentina out wide, because we've got the confidence and our skills to do so. Geordie Barrett mentioned afterwards, he said, with it being wet, we felt with our skills being superior, we could pressurise them, and actually we still backed ourselves. Really interesting on the emotional come down for New Zealand after Ireland. Aaron Smith was emotional himself afterwards, saying he was just saying, look, the 4 years ago when we lost in the semi to England, that was rock bottom for me. It was devastating, and that's what has driven me on to this point, and actually had, I think, driven the All Blacks all week, knowing that they'd previously smashed Ireland in a well, they obviously didn't smash them this time, but in 2019 they smashed Ireland, and then just weren't at the same pitch the next week. So there was that added incentive and that added desire from them, and they were plenty good. I know Angus Gardner's copped some stick for some breakdown sort of interpretations, and afterwards we had. I don't want to overstate this, but one of the moments of the tournament where Michael Cheika was explaining these wrote down interpretations in Spanish and broke out of Spanish to say that's the game, brother. And that I haven't stopped thinking about that since, to be honest.
And by the end, New Zealand were throwing away tries for fun. Mwanga not passing to Will Jordan where he could have broke the try scoring record. I mean, by that second half, by the time Aaron Smith scored that try just after half time, that was Argentina's goose was cooked. The game was gone, and it just became almost you don't really want to say this, and no disrespect to Argentina, but it almost became a bit of a training ground exercise by the second half because the game was so far from them that they're not a team that are going to chase down a sizable lead against the All Blacks. Argentina, they needed to be always in touch, if maybe not if always leading. There was that big moment that we discussed after the game in the aftermath where Argentina chose to kick the 3, where they had a penalty that they could have kicked a touch, and when they were already trailing.
You're underselling this. You couldn't stop telling anyone who would listen on the metro about this moment on the way back to where we were staying. It almost made you explode.
Yeah, I felt at the time when you were trailing. I can't remember how many points they were trailing by at the time, but I think it might have been 6, maybe 9 points in the first half. They had a penalty that they decided to kick for goal when they'd had a period of pressure in the New Zealand 22. And I felt like that was the moment where they should have kicked to the corner, 5-metre line out, and tried to. Their maul was good. Argentina's maul was good, and they should have tried to. That was the time they had to score a try there. They had to get some points on the board, and I just didn't feel like chipping away with 3 points was going to be enough for Argentina against this New Zealand team. They were going to have to score a try at some point, and that felt like a big moment. Once they kicked that 3, New Zealand went down the other end, and then from there on, it was all one-way traffic. It was a procession, really.
Just to wrap up this section before we do a bit of a deeper dive into the final, just a quick yes/no. Does Will Jordan break the Rugby World Cup try scoring record, which he's currently tied on with 8 with Jonah Lomu, Julian Surveyor and Brian Habana? Will he get the one against South Africa that he needs in the final? Charlie, yes or no?
Yes, for Richie Mwanga's sake.
Charles?
I'm going to go yes. And an interesting stat that I was handed yesterday by a friend of mine is that if he does do it, he will be the only one of that group to have scored in the final.
Ooh, that's quite good. I'm going to go no. The weather in Paris isn't very good, and it might be the same as last week. Kicking glory. Right, let's do a bit more analysis on the final next. Okay, South Africa win back-to-back finals. But are New Zealand maybe the favourites? Charlie, if I come to you first, based on what they've done the last couple of weeks?
Yes, I think so. I haven't looked at what the bookies are saying. I don't know if they are genuine favourites, but I would have New Zealand as favourites. I think that they will win. I think that the last 2 weekends will have taken so much out of South Africa. I think it's a massive, massive ask for them to go again against that calibre of opposition. And New Zealand have been just building very, very steadily. If you think about their nadir, their rock bottom was that warm-up against South Africa at Twickenham, where they were obliterated, their heaviest ever loss to South Africa. And since then, it's just been steady improvement after steady improvement. Even in the France game, I know they lost, but for 40, 50 minutes, they were arguably the better side and looked like they were going to go on and win. And then since then, it's just been upwards and onwards. And that demolition of Italy, that miraculous victory really against Ireland, where they were phenomenal. And then they've had an extra day's rest heading into the final. They didn't play as strenuous a test in their semi-final on Friday night as South Africa did on Saturday against England. I think they have to be favourites. I think that they will cope. They will cope better with the bomb squad and South Africa's physicality as well.
I guess if there's one area that might worry you slightly if you're an All Blacks fan, it's going to be the scrum and just whether New Zealand's props can sort of handle what South Africa have been dishing out over the last couple of weeks. I mean, I don't love the idea of, if I'm an All Blacks fan, of Oxenchair against Fletcher Newell in the second half late on in Paris. That feels like a scrum mismatch, and maybe that'll maybe that'll force Foster's hand, and maybe he might go another way and have Ofa Tuangafasi on the bench instead. I think that's going to be where South Africa hope that they can make some ground. I don't necessarily think it will happen on Tamiati Williams' side up against kind of Francois Herber and Vincent Koch, because I think he's quite a good scrummager. But yeah, the Nche Fletcher Newell potential matchup does worry me slightly.
Where New Zealand can sort of take hope is that England really should, by the time Ox and Vincent Koch came on and started doing their thing, England should have been further in front from the dominance that they had and the way that the game had gone. New Zealand will be probably saying the same, in that we could go out and blow them away first half, a bit like England did, blow them away in the start of the second half, and the game could be gone by the time the bomb squad comes on. And really, with England, you're looking at one more penalty, one more drop goal, and that probably would have been the case in the semi-final as well. So I think New Zealand will fancy themselves as a better side than England. They could come out. The Box play quite a limited, conservative game plan, although they do move the ball wider. Normally now, they didn't last weekend, and I think they'd back themselves to sting them and take, sort of neutralise the threat of that bomb squad in that way, rather than addressing it directly.
Yeah, Charlie, what are South Africa going to do? There's some selection decisions they kind of need to make, don't they? Because they hooked Manny Libak on 31 minutes. Damien Willemse was off pretty early in the second half. It just felt like they didn't have any control of the kicking game, and that they were making basic errors. Would you start Pollard and the current crowd favourite in England, Villy Le Roux, after his antics at the final whistle? Would you start both of them?
I'd definitely start Faf de Klerk. I'm not sure the other two. I'm not sure. Really, really interestingly, Damien Willemse, the last time he looked that ruffled in a game was when New Zealand New Zealand sort of delivered the template on how to play against South Africa in Auckland in July by kicking a lot off 10, finding Willemse, isolating Willemse and Mapimpi and those guys in the back three and winning the scraps, because where they are, Charles kind of hinted at it there, where they have another dimension to England is they can probably be just as accurate with and just as kind of teasing with that kicking game with Mo'unga and Beauden Barrett and Geordie Barrett. But what they have off the back of that is when they are winning those loose balls back, they'll have the confidence and the ability to spread the ball to space off the back of that and score tries rather than just rely on going 3-3-3. So they're a huge. I thought de Klerk, actually, I spoke to him afterwards and said, what were the specifics behind your role? And he said, which really kind of surprised me, he said body language, because actually, and it was really funny. If you picked up after the game, they were desperate to sort of give the impression that self-belief had never wavered, but Faf de Klerk sort of admitted, self-belief was sort of in danger of, it's not always the case, but in danger of wavering a little bit. You're like, that seems to be the case. He was very calm. I think I would start Pollard, because going 3-6-9 for South Africa is going to be very important. Le Roux, jury's out. Still unsure. I think Willemse gives you that little bit. He's still got spark there, and I think maybe in harness with Pollard that might still be valuable.
But I think Willemse was disastrous in that rain. Like, he was absolutely all over the shop. I don't think they can take that risk again. I think I'd start Le Roux, definitely. I think Willemse, England completely rattled him. He looked absolutely all over the shop. I thought he was the worst player on the pitch, frankly. And I was surprised that they didn't hook him at the same time as Libak and bring Pollard and Le Roux on together, because I think they were both. I think to be honest, I think Willemse looked more lost than Libak, but I know obviously fly half is more of a sort of integral position, so I can understand why they did it. I think there's a chance that Visa comes back in Jasper Wiese comes back in just for a bit more physicality. He hasn't played the last 2 matches, so he'll be fresh and raring to go. And they did look a bit overawed and overwhelmed physically, South Africa, didn't they? And that's one thing that Wiese brings you. He potentially isn't as much of a sort of cerebral rugby player as Dwayne Vermeulen, but he brings that sort of visceral edge that you perhaps want in a one-off game like this. I can't see them going unchanged again. I think that they might see that as a bit of a, that they've got away with one there. They've got out of jail free. I think that might have been a mistake going unchanged between France and England.
I think that's a good point. I'd be up for Villy Leroux starting, if only to keep himself in the mix for player of the tournament and justify my prediction, which looks like a bit of a damp squib at the minute, sure.
Oh, well, you say that, Charlie, but I was actually going to big you up a bit because you're the only person left in the game for World Cup winner and player of the tournament. I mean, if Villy Leroux scores about 4 tries and he's named player of the match, then you might walk home with the whole bag. So congratulations in a way. That would be quite something. We've got to mention Wayne Barnes, actually, who we can now confirm officially after Charlie broke the story on Sunday is going to be the referee for the World Cup final, first time in his career. Are we thinking he probably would have been, or maybe would have been 4 years ago had England not shot New Zealand and got to the final? Because we were sort of laughing about the prospect of this kind of England team who've had to sort themselves out in a hurry, squeaking into the final and potentially denying Barnes another shot at the big game. But that's not going to happen. He's there and he's going to get it, which feels like a justified reward for a very fine referee, doesn't it, Charles?
Absolutely. It seems mad that he was refereeing a quarter-final in 2007 and now in 2023, 16 years on, this is his first final. But yeah, no, really well deserved. I will be honest, I thought that maybe in the COVID years, 2020, sort of maybe even 2019, 2021, he wasn't refereeing at his best level. I don't think I thought he dropped off a little bit for whatever reason. I'm sure there's extenuating and mitigating reasons for it, and it's not a criticism of him. But I just think that others had overtaken him a little bit, but now absolutely not. I think that he is indisputably the best referee in the world, and he gets his just desserts for that.
Charlie, what's it like on the referee beat, trying to get those stories? Is it hard times? Is there lots of kind of having to work your sources hard? Talk to us.
Always. No, to kind of return to 2019, that was the way the wind was blowing, wasn't it? And I agree. I just think now, and maybe Charles makes a point about his little dip from Barnes, but I think now, certainly at this tournament, he's just, and maybe the sort of 18 months previously, he's just seemed in real command of really big, chaotic games between sides that are so evenly matched. And that's what you want from that. It was almost a shame that the game, the second semi-final ended on a scrummaging call, because actually I thought that the way the game panned out, it was sort of a fair result in the end, and a kind of reward for South Africa making those decisive changes. So it's a shame that Ben O'Keefe became the kind of talking point again, and I just find that so boring. That adults are watching a game and then sort of complaining about the ref as the first sort of reaction, and just find it bizarre. But
he was pretty good, to be fair. I thought in the game as a whole, I think he was pretty good.
Yeah, and Angus Gardner penalised Argentina a lot in the first half against New Zealand, but guess what? New Zealand put them under a hell of a lot of pressure in all sorts of facets of the game. So that felt, it didn't feel disastrous either. I just think with Barnes, he has the kind of, he's almost like he's so comfortable in his own skin now that he's willing to kind of ride and adapt on the hoof to these huge games, as I say, are so tight and decided by tiny margins themselves, without him having to be a factor. That I think it's just a fantastic choice and entirely well deserved.
Certainly, always quite fun to listen to over the Ref Talk app, isn't he? Old Wayne, he's an excellent communicator with players. I don't think anybody that we know sort of picked this final pre-tournament in New Zealand, South Africa, which seems quite odd given their pedigree at the tournament and how often they both won the competition and reached the final. But it is New Zealand, South Africa, and I wonder who's going to be the one that kind of breaks the. If we start thinking about predictions and getting into that, who's going to be the team who's the first to win a fourth Rugby World Cup? I like that is kind of that is on the line as well for whoever wins this. Charles, if I come to you first, how do you sort of see the game panning out, and who do you think will win, and who do you want to win to add a bit of spice to it?
I think it'll be cagey and tight for sort of 50 minutes, and then I think New Zealand will run away with it. But relatively speaking, I think they'll finish as sort of 7 to 10 point winners, with South Africa running out of steam after giving it a really good lash. Who do I want to win? I don't really mind. I just want to see a good game. I think that there have been plenty of valid criticisms levelled at this tournament. Some preventable, some unavoidable. And I think it needs a really spectacular final to just send it off with a bit of momentum for the next 4 years. So if we could have just a cracking game, New Zealand and South Africa, that would be great. Thanks very much.
Will you be like Ian Foster with your popcorn, just watching, not caring who wins?
I will be. I will have my popcorn and I'll have my feet up and I won't care who wins.
Perfect. Charlie, you're going to be there. What are you hoping for from this final this week?
I'm going to be there, so my trotters won't be up. There isn't enough. The desks are too cramped. What am I hoping for? I hope that whoever wins deserves it and is good enough on the day to sort of justify that. I think New Zealand will. I think I'm the opposite to Charles. Actually, I think New Zealand will have to start strongly as they did in Auckland in July, and put a bit of space between them and make sure that South Africa don't have a lead and are able to squeeze. I just think, the big cliche is the stars make fights, and they're what makes these two nations have such a compelling rivalry is that they sort of view the game in different ways, and that to beat New Zealand, South Africa often have to pull something out of the bag as far as ball movement and slick attack, and to beat South Africa, New Zealand have to stand up in the tight exchanges. So I'm hoping for another one of them. It's meant to be raining all week in Paris, and then also on the day of the game as well. So that could play a part. Although, as we've said all along, New Zealand's skill they played Namibia in an absolute monsoon, didn't they, in Toulouse, and looked pretty slick. And again, it was pretty greasy in the Argentina game. I've backed South Africa the whole way. I can't change horses now, but I think New Zealand are coming on really strong.
Oh, and just to say, I didn't have this as a final, but I had France New Zealand, so I was 50% correct if we're counting.
I don't think we are counting 50% correct final predictions. I mean, why would we give that any? Goodness me.
I actually had New Zealand Fiji as the final, so I'm 50% correct.
Yeah, exactly. I'm now trying to wrap my brains to what I predicted. Charlie, you must have predicted South Africa, France. I'm guessing.
Yeah, well,
no, that can't be right.
I remember
South Africa.
A year ago, I predicted South Africa England as the final, so I gaffed. Yeah, I mean, I was predicting a big England semi-final performance, and then to get the same final as last time. I'll find it for you if you can wait, but I don't think we can wait. Can we?
You predicted South Africa England a year ago. What, as in?
Not yet. As in when Steve Borthwick took the job, so just slightly less than a year ago.
Wow, that was quite bold. You weren't quite right, but you were nearly there.
No, nearly right.
50% counts apparently. I think I do wonder about the clash of styles in the weather, and it's more that South Africa will be desperate to lure New Zealand into that kind of kicking game. And it's not that New Zealand can't play that kicking game. They've got Mwanga and Barrett and Aaron Smith's box kicks. I just don't know if New Zealand want to play that way. I'll be interested to see how Colby and Arenzi get on in the air this week, having struggled a bit last week against May and Daly. If they're going to have going to have Will Jordan, who's essentially a fullback, sort of coming at them, and Mark Telea's pretty good in the air, pretty good over the ball at the breakdown. I think that's quite interesting. We've talked a bit about the scrum, and if South could get on top there, then potentially that could swing the game like it did last week. It's hard, actually, which hopefully means that we'll get an absolute belter of a final. But I'm just maybe leaning towards South Africa, because I feel like ruling South Africa off is foolish based on the last couple of World Cups. But I wouldn't mind seeing a New Zealand win with Will Jordan getting a couple of tries to set a record of 10 tries in a World Cup tournament, which I'm not sure will be beaten. So yeah, those are our predictions. Finals coming up on Saturday. Let's have some of your questions and then we'll get out of here. Okay, just finishing up with some questions and thoughts. Stephen Colmer, who messaged me just for what we made of England's kind of lack of use of George Ford, not just in the semi-final but in the quarter-final as well, given that he started the tournament with those performances against Argentina and Japan where he was so good, and then he's gone on to have only 2 minutes in the knockout stages. I just wondered maybe more of a longer term question, because I was doing a squad audit of kind of England's players yesterday, trying to work out who's going to be back for 2027 and who won't be. And Ford's one of those interesting ones where, you know, he'll be 34 by 2027, which isn't too old by any means to be the World Cup. But if Farrell's still there, does he still want to be playing second fiddle to Farrell? Charles, I just wondered what you make of this kind of situation that England have with Ford and Farrell, which I feel like we've never spoken about before in the last decade of English rugby.
I mean, I've touched on it in this pod already. I mean, I think they need to find a way of playing them both. I mean, we know that or at least being able to play them both, because we know that it has and can work. We know that Steve Borthwick tailors selections to bespoke selections to specific opposition. So there's not always going to be a case to start them both, or it might be a case of Ford starting or Farrell starting at 10. I think with a world-class 13 and a back three that is well-rounded with individual threats of their own, I think that Ford Farrell as a 10-12 axis works. And as I said earlier on, I think that in hindsight, and I mean, I know that's a wonderful thing, and which they wouldn't have had the benefit of last week. I think I would have gone Ford Farrell against South Africa if the game plan was literally to kick the leather off everything at every opportunity. Because in the end, you know, Joe Marchant didn't put a foot wrong. From what I can remember, and his work rate was excellent, and he was full of energy, but he didn't really have that much to do. So there's not really. You might as well have had the dual kicking option and just try and just take every single point that was on offer, and maybe just try and get just that bit further ahead of South Africa when the points were on offer. Charlie, anything to add on that?
That's so difficult. It's so difficult. And it's a great question. And yeah, in hindsight, it's a seriously ballsy move at the time, isn't it? To go, you did just feel though, I don't know, I can't remember whether I said this at the time. You guys will be able to kind of help me out, I think. But at 15-6, it did feel like they needed one more score. However they got it. And South Africa sort of, they're among all the replacements they made, they obviously kind of reinstated the spine of their backline by bringing on de Klerk, Pollard and Leroux. But what they also did was sacrifice Eben Etzebeth, who's among their best players. They also took off Dwayne Vermeulen and Sia Khaleesi for Quagga Smith and Fourie, and all of those changes brought something. Snyman particularly was just colossal. So yeah, at 15-6, do you think it felt like a sort of it felt like a last resort to throw on forward, didn't it? Well, it was a last resort to throw on forward when they needed to get back ahead after that second penalty. So difficult. If you're proactive before that, you clearly South Africa were holding the ball for quite a long time, so you lose that little bit of steel defensively. So difficult. I thought the way that Borthwick dealt with his replacements was really, really good. I don't think it was prescribed. I've seen it sort of mentioned as prescribed, but actually I think he did really well in that regard. And if he's doing that so early in his career as a Test head coach, I think it bodes really well for England.
Do you think George Martin had a knock? Did we get to the bottom of this? Was it just that he was knackered? Because that was the one, wasn't it? I mean, we've already touched on it earlier in the pod. That was the one where we were a bit like, really? Is that the right call?
He'd been, a physio had come on for him to have a look at him. Said afterwards that he was fine. He's a young guy who isn't used to going 80 minutes in test matches. That's just a fact. So I imagine he was goosed, and he'd absolutely emptied himself, hadn't he? And you'd hope for England's sake that by the 2027 World Cup he'll be playing 80 minutes regularly.
His knee was strapped up, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it always is.
Yeah.
How have we got this far into it without saying who's going to win the bronze final on Friday? Charles, you want it to be abolished. So let's start with you.
Well, yeah, I just think after the how deep into the well emotionally and physically England had to go, I think now it just seems. I'm not saying this because we're an English paper and it's got nothing to do with that. I'd have been saying the same if it was a South Africa-Argentina bronze final. I just think it's a pointless game in the era of player welfare to be playing a one-off meaningless match that nobody before the tournament wants to play in. Nobody. They'd all said, no, we've got no interest in it. And I think England deep down will be feeling that this week too. And now, in the context of the tournament, they ironically have to come up against an Argentina team who are desperate to play in this game and bloodthirsty for pool stage revenge. They're, keen to right the wrongs of their semi-final. And they haven't been good. The Pumas haven't been good in this tournament, and yet we could be in a scenario whereby England are going to get blindsided on Friday night against a team who are treating it as their World Cup final, and Argentina finish third. Pool D, the worst pool in World Cup history, is going to provide the third and fourth place teams in this World Cup. Let that sink in.
It's quite fitting, isn't it? Pool D taking the spotlight on Friday night. Charlie, who's going to win?
I think England again, although I think it's going to be closer than the first game, and I think Argentina have real reason to be up for it because of how poor they were in that first game, and then again how poor they were or how overwhelmed they were. In the semi-final. The noises we're getting out of England are encouraging because I think they really need to win to consolidate the goodwill that they've earned from that first performance. From the semi-final performance, and the noises from Steve Borthwick suggest that, and you wouldn't expect any differently from him, to kind of finish on a high. I think in doing so, he'll want to give some veterans a farewell, and he might want to reward guys who've been rotated mainly out of the squad. So yeah, I can see England edging it. I always think of third, fourth playoffs. So I always think of when Phil Neville was Lionesses manager, just basically bringing a press conference to silence by calling it a nonsense game, and it just was really sort of aggressively savage the game pre-kickoff, not even after the game. It's brilliant. I think we all sort of know it's a bit of a nonsense, don't we? But I think both sides want to win it, and I think England do.
Yeah, I mean, all I know is that Argentina are bang up for it, as they reiterated on Friday night. And Thomas Cayo even said, "I'd like to face England again." Thomas, your wish is granted. Still think England win though, and it might be a nice farewell for many players like Courtney Laws and others who've given lots of years of excellent service. So yeah, hopefully, just please entertain us and don't be as weird as the England-Argentina game in Marseille. I think that's the only wish that we can really have. Right, that's it for today. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Charles. It's Rugby World Cup final week. We made it. Absolutely delighted. Thanks for listening to the podcast and for downloading it, and a reminder to check out all of our coverage on the website this week. Loads of build up towards Friday's game between Argentina and England, and towards the final as well. And then we'll be back next week for the final episode of the series, reflecting on the tournament, handing out some awards, looking back on the final as well. But until then, from all three of us, thank you and goodbye.
Hello, Telegraph Rugby Podcast listeners. I'm Danny Kerr, and I've teamed up with Owen Mitchell, the official legal partner of England Rugby, to share some special moments that matter from the game we care so much about. Search for Moments That Matter with Owen Mitchell and the Telegraph.